Well, these are some recollections, experiences with Morris Weigelt, partly for my own record, but also in particular for Marva, one of Morris's children, and the one that I don't know if I know best, Marva. I think I had one of your younger siblings as a student during a summer course at Nazarene Theological Seminary. This would be after your dad retired, of course, and shortly after I moved from Nampa to Point Loma, I did a little bit of summer school teaching at the seminary. I can't think of his name now, but I think it starts with a G. And he often punctuated discussions in class with, oh, that's right, he'd say, "That's huge." That's huge. Well, I had Morris Weigelt as a co-teacher in my freshman level, I think my very first fall at Nampa, biblical history and literature course. He taught it with Dan Berg, who was, I'm pretty sure, brand new that year. And they're both great, But Morris Weigelt, oh my goodness, I just remember having this repeated experience of walking out of these lectures. I'm just happy that as a freshman I appreciated them. I would just feel blown away by what I heard, and always in just a really good way, just powerful stuff, powerful. Dan was good, but I always kind of felt bad for Dan because alongside Dr. Weigelt and what he brought to that class every time he lectured was just so rich. I don't have, and my one specific memory, and my only one, but on a day in which he was near the end of the lecture talking about, what in theology we might call divine transcendence and mystery. Morris Weigelt said something to the effect, you cannot speak the unspeakable, you cannot scrute the inscrutable. I love that. You cannot scrute the inscrutable, you cannot F the ineffable. This is before, of course, the letter F began commonly to signify something else. But you cannot F the ineffable. And I was so tickled by that I remembered it all for all those years. That was my experience of him during my freshman year, and that was it, as far as I recall. During my sophomore years, when we learned that he was going to be moving at the end of the school year from Nampa to Kansas City, and that was cause for great lament and mourning among many students, and certainly especially religion majors at NNC, of which I was not one. By that time, I was a psychology major, and this brings me to my next memory. Sometime during that sophomore year, prior to the spring term, because I did take him his last term there, because it was his last term, that's why I took the class that I did. But prior to that, so probably early in I'm going to say January or so, I don't know, of 1975, I saw Dr. Weigelt in the gym. I don't know why. I don't know what he was doing, but we were both there. I know it was the gym. And I said, "Oh, Dr. Weigelt, well, we're going to miss you here at NNC," and blah, blah, whatever else I said. But it was mostly to say, "I'm just sorry to see you go." And he looked at me, and he always had that real interesting sort of, twinkle in his eye kind of thing. But he said, "Well, who knows, Mike, maybe I'll see you in Kansas City in a couple of years." And when he said that, it struck me as such an unusual and utterly unlikely prospect that, not out of disrespect, but just by, just the ludicrous nature of the suggestion, I just laughed. I did. I laughed like, "Oh, that's never going to happen." And of course it did happen. But prior to that, going to seminary, of course, I'll say again, later in that sophomore year, the last term that Morris Weigelt taught at NNC, I took apocalyptic literature from him, and that was it was a huge impact on me. You've asked about his sort of theological, commitments, and that's hard for me to say. I had these 2 Bible classes, and I subsequently had one with him in seminary. I will say this: he never struck me in apocalyptic literature as particularly conservative. I'll start there. I know that he had us read The Method and Message of Apocalyptic by D.S. Russell. That's part of the Old Testament Library series, highly regarded biblical scholarship series, and definitely was, reflected the cutting edge of historical critical approaches to Daniel, the book of Daniel, and the book of Revelation, and all the apocalyptic literature. I can tell you that for sure that the papers I wrote, and they were all, I think they were like brief 2 to 3 page kind of, engagement reflection papers and stuff. For whatever reason, my tendency was always to go to the most, we'll say, critical reading, the most that took seriously historical, social elements in the text. And I don't know why, that was just where I gravitated, and he certainly never objected at all. I never got the sense that, he was somehow protecting either his students or the Bible from, careful thought, scrutiny, questions. I remember, and I don't know why, I guess because I wrote it in my notes, there was a day when, and I don't know, I have to Google this myself, but there was a scholar named R.H. Charles, and I don't know why I remember this. For that matter, why I remember D.S. Russell, other than that I still have that book by D.S. Russell. But R.H. Charles, without my Googling him, I have this sense that he was a more conservative scholar. And I don't know if we read something by him. I know that a student brought something up in class and said something like, well, R.H. Charles says whatever, and here's what Morris Weigelt said in response: R.H. Charles is full of beans. And that was so funny to me that I wrote that in my notes, and I've remembered it ever since. The only person I know of that is full of beans is R.H. Charles. And so there's that. It seems like there was one other thing. Oh, I know what it was. I remember that I went home from that class, or maybe during spring break or something, in the midst of that class. My dad was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and for Seventh-day Adventists, Daniel and Revelation are kind of like, what we call a canon within the canon, and very highly regarded, and of course, and not read historically, critically at all. And not that my dad was still a Seventh-day Adventist, but that was his upbringing. And so I'm talking about this apocalyptic literature class. This is actually a very significant moment. I remember we're downstairs in our home in Kennewick, Washington. And I'm kind of going on and on about all I'm learning about apocalyptic literature and, its forms and influences, etc. And as I'm talking, including like the dating of Daniel, and that's very big for Seventh-day Adventists, that it's dated at a relatively early date, we'll say like 6 centuries before Christ. And that way it has all these prophetic, prophecies that have come true. Well, the more critical date puts it 4 or 5 centuries later, when these prophesied events have actually already happened. So they're in the past. And so I do remember this moment where my dad's face is just kind of visibly changing. Maybe he's getting paler. I don't remember exactly. But it's one of those moments, actually, where I thought I had this internal voice say, you may not be able to freely share everything that you're thinking or learning with your parents, your dad. They may not accept all of this just because you're saying it. So that was kind of a critical moment, I think, in my life, actually. Dr. Weigelt, of course, did leave us then at the beginning, what was the beginning of my junior year. I should add that his replacement, C.S. Coles, ended up being a truly profound influence on me, the most important human influence in my life for sure. And so, oh, my dog is biting. Coco, no. I think she's destroying a pen right now. Anyway, I'm going to do a couple more minutes before I go intervene. So I wanted to say that Morris Weigelt did come back to campus for the senior retreat, spring of my senior year. And I don't know if I know I hadn't decided on NTS at that point, although it was on my radar more. I'd gone through some changes. But he was a great speaker, of course, for this retreat. I had nothing to do with the planning of it, but I was not a surprise that those of my colleagues, my peers who planned this retreat wanted Dr. Weigelt to come back and be our speaker. And it was really rich. I don't remember anything he said now, but it was really good. And I did have the opportunity to drive him when he left, because he left a little bit before our retreat was over, maybe just like, half a day. So wherever we were, out in the mountains somewhere, I drove him someplace where he could get a plane. And it was a nice conversation. I don't remember much about it at all, but that I was really happy I got to do that. So I'll just say then, well, I'll pause here.